Hey, I'm Kevan Baesso, or you may know me as the Oaf. I'm from Hamilton, born and raised, and right now I'm playing bass in Life Imprisonment as well as in The Plain Steel. So, what got me into punk and metal and stuff, I'll do this kind of in stages because it kind of flows from one into the other. So, started off, my old man. He played in bands and stuff when I was a kid. That's just kind of what we did. You know, he would went to jam, he went to practice and stuff like that. And so music was always around, especially punk rock stuff. But like, he was into hardcore, but not like all the like super fast stuff. He was into a lot of the artier stuff. Like he really liked Perubu and stuff like that. So I have a really wide range of that sort of stuff just burned into me. I guess like when I was growing up, I thought it was normal for everyone to listen to Iggy Pop all the time. Like turns out not everyone grew up listening to the Stooges and the Ramones and stuff like that. So for me, it just became normal. And when I was old enough, I started playing. Like I picked up my dad's bass and started playing Ramones tunes and Nirvana songs and stuff. And I'll never forget my old man saying to me like, "Oh, you're listening to all this punk rock stuff. It's shit." Made me a cassette tape, off the records that I've got here with Black Flag and all that sort of stuff on there. And that's kind of how I got into punk rock at first, and that's when I started my first band when I was 12 years old, playing like Ramones and very, very horribly, but playing Ramones covers and stuff like that for buddies in our basement and everything. And that was always great. But from there, I guess the only way for me to go was getting into more extreme stuff. And for that, I credit my buddy Mick, who I met when I was a teenager, and I ended up playing in bands with him later on. But he got me into black metal and like more extreme metal and stuff like that, and just you know, we became bandmates for years, and he led to me listening to a lot of that heavier stuff. But another big influence for me getting into all that sort of stuff was Ryland, who again I played with other bands. He was like 5 years older than me. When I first joined his band, I was 19. Wet behind the ears, as the saying goes. And yeah, he showed, that's where I got into Dayglow and Rudimentary Peni and all that sort of stuff, like the classic punk rock stuff that everyone loves these days. So yeah, that's how I got into punk rock and metal and stuff like that. Alright, so my main influences growing up, I would say, similarly to why I got into like punk rock and stuff like that, my dad. Um, Obviously, like being in bands and everything like that, once I started playing, he showed me how to play. And like once I was like a little bit better at it and could actually hold it down a little bit, he started like grooming me to be his guitar player or his bass player. And so there's many times, many hours of us sitting there and playing, and him being like, stop, the fuck are you doing? You're playing it wrong. Like that's not how it's played. Play it like this. And at the time, I may have been upset, but in retrospect, it's really good for me. Like it was great training as a bass player because it taught me to be on time always, so that way you don't get yelled at. But no, basically that's where my fundamentals for playing came from. That's where I learned and where I got into all of the bigger bands that even now today, like Flipper and stuff like that. Flipper are one of my favorite bands of all time. My parents got me into them. Like, the Flipper live album, Public Flipper Limited, the last song was recorded in Toronto. My parents were there, which is cool. Apparently Flipper were there that night, and they all had working girls waiting for them outside with fur coats and everything, because I guess they'd been paid in advance, so they were partying that night. But I digress. So my dad totally got me into a lot of stuff, but definitely once I was like 19 and started playing in bands for real, again, going back, Ryland, my buddy, he's who brought me into like the hardcore punk scene, basically. Because before that, I was just some asshole kid at home playing in my basement, like playing with my buddies, not really doing gigs. But that was when I first started like being in a real band and everything, and that's kind of where I learned how to be in a band, because that is a big part of it, like having to interact with other people, and having to manage a band, as it were, because it's punk rock, no one has actual managers, we have to do it ourselves, so that's kind of how I learned to do it, or mismanage it in certain cases, but that's how it goes, So, my first concert, probably, like, besides seeing, like, 5440 and stuff like that, at, like, Festival of Friends, my very first, like, real concert was I was 12, almost 13, I believe. My dad took me to see Marilyn Manson at Cops Coliseum, or whatever the hell it's called now. It was Cops Coliseum then, damn it. But yeah, it was a great show. I actually have a bootleg of it somewhere on video cassette that I somehow found. Yeah, it's awesome. It's especially for me as a kid, seeing that, it was really influential, seeing a big gig like that, and seeing, regardless of what people may think of them as a band or him as a dude, because he is an asshole, admittedly. Back then they were a great fucking live band, and like you can't argue with that. So it was a great fucking show. My very first punk rock show, though, like when I think of shows like that, I'm talking like gigs, like at a bar somewhere, as opposed to like a big venue, like in Toronto or whatever, But my first gig that I went to was, that I remember at least, it was after Gnarly Skull practice. Back then, when I first joined the band, all of our practices involved a lot of drinking, like a lot of drinking. So I remember going to the Underground at a band, and we showed up super late, probably midnight, and Riot Star was going on, and they were headlining, and it was a great fucking show. I don't really remember a whole lot besides the singer was wearing a wetsuit that slowly came off during the show. I remember I vomited out of a car that night and ripped a piece of my friend's jacket off to wipe my face with. And that is pretty much the end of that night for me. I time traveled home. So that was my first gig. Okay, so my favorite shows. There's a lot. I'll kind of go by category, just so that way it's a little bit easier. So like, first off, for like smaller gigs, like around town or whatever, I've seen a lot of good ones. I was lucky enough to open for SNFU at the Casbah, like 2007 maybe, something like that. Fucking great gig, as always, like as to be expected. Around the same time, I saw Perubu at the Absinthe. A few years later, I ended up seeing Lydia Lunch and Retrovirus at the Taint. That was a fucking great show as well. Lydia Lunch is awesome. That was amazing. Lots of gigs. I was saying before, seeing Dayglow in Crash's basement at the old shop. That was fucking great. Where they started with the stuff off of the demo from the 80s. That was fucking badass. Cretin, if you ever see this, you should start more shows like that. That was awesome. Bigger shows that I've been to that I really liked. Chelsea Wolfe is awesome. Definitely not punk rock or anything, kind of metal-ish. I'll pause while the assholes on motorcycles drive by. But yeah, no, Chelsea Wolfe is awesome. Seen her live a few times, to be recommended. Few obviously shows that I've played, a lot of them I really enjoyed. Like some of my favorite shows, like for example, is that one that you filmed at the Doors, with Decade and Sick of Shit and Bleeding Out and stuff like that. that was probably the best set we ever did with Bacon. So that was a really fun night for everyone. That was one of my favorite shows, I think. Um, you know, but yeah, I think that's pretty much sums up some of my favorite. Oh, the Butthole Surfers. I forgot. There's always so many. I saw the Butthole Surfers when they did the reunion tour with Pincus and Teresa, the second drummer lady, and it was awesome. I was very fucked up. I remember I was heckling Pincus the entire night for some reason, and just kept on chanting Pincus at him over and over in between songs, and yeah, it was a great night. I remember having like almost a transcendental experience in the middle of the Bong song, as they were doing like the psychedelic parts in between. And we have a great quote from the guitarist Paul Leary's wife, because afterwards we were exuberantly telling them how great they were and how awesome Gibby was and everything. And someone said, Gibby's a genius, and she goes, yeah, but he's really fucked up a lot of the time too. So there you have it from Paul Leary's wife. But yeah, that was probably one of my favorite gigs to go to. Past and current bands. I'll kind of start in chronological order. My very first band when I was like 12, we started as The Obsessed, and we realized that was a shitty name and like very derivative of many other names, so we changed it to Lofus, which apparently means horse dick in a different language, because we were 12 and tried to be offensive as possible. After that, I played in a bunch of really shitty bands throughout my teen years, with my buddies and stuff. At one point, I had a cool little thing going on where I had like a drum machine. Like, I was kind of envisioning a Big Black type thing, but the other people in the band were not. So I guess your average 15-year-old is not well versed in Big Black at that point. So, at any rate, when I was like 18 or so, I started playing with my buddy Mick. He's the one who showed me a lot of black metal stuff and everything like that, got me into Mayhem and Dark Throne and all that. And he's the guy that he asked me to play bass for a band he was in. Our mutual friend Bobby was putting together a band. He'd always wanted to start one called End of Eternity. No offense, Bobby, but it turned out we were very shitty goth metal. And so after like 6 months or so, we ended up not having Bobby in the band, and we slowly morphed into Chronosphere, and like went through many lineup changes. But over the years, it was always Mick and I, like at every gig. We went through a lot of different drummers. Ended up with Chris Jawborn on drums, and Chris is a machine. He's an animal. And we did a lot of gigs with Chronosphere over the years, But before that, I actually, like as Chronosphere was in its embryo stages type thing, I actually joined Gnarly Skull. Ryland he wandered into the jam space at the Jam House, if anyone remembers that, down near Wentworth Street. We were practicing one night, and all of a sudden a very drunk punk rock dude with a lot of tattoos staggered in, grabbed a microphone and started screaming. And so Ryland joined Chronosphere as our first vocalist, and in turn I ended up joining Gnarly Skull because they needed a bass player, because Ryan had just left. So I've been in Gnarly Skull off and on ever since. I left in the mid-2000s, I think. No, like 2014, something like that. But came back a few years later, did a few shows. Band's not really active these days, but like if there's ever any reunions, I will be there, for better or for worse. Besides that, when I was doing Chronosphere, basically the same band, but with like us playing different instruments. We also did Rigorous Obliteration, which in retrospect was really shitty black metal, which was fun though, because I got to wear like corpse paint and gauntlets and stuff like that, and it was silly. You know, I got to act like an asshole, like give me the King Whopper and stuff like that. You know, so it was awesome. A fun story about that actually. We played Toronto one time, and it was weird. Like everyone was taking us very seriously. Like we had chosen like really silly stage names. Like mine was Bell Ragnar, you know, because it was just the most ridiculous thing I could think of. And there's kids coming up to me like, "Are you Bell Ragnar?" And it's like, "Yes, but you can just call me Kevin. It's cool." Yeah, like just totally weird shit like that. But after we played, we're fucking standing there, and some dude from a different band in Toronto, who I'm not gonna say because he's a big band, but comes up and he says, "I am a part of the Black Circle of Toronto. I would like you to come and join us." And it's like, I'm like, what? What the fuck are you talking about? You know, like for anyone who knows black metal stuff, like that's basically he's regurgitating bullshit from the early 90s in Norway, and it's like, it's stupid. You know? And so he's basically, it boils down to them getting drunk in the woods with a fucking fire, and it's like, you know, they're acting like it's some mysterious bullshit, the Black Circle of Toronto. You're getting drunk in the woods. Like, just call it what it is. Like, Jesus Christ, you know, like, you can wear corpse paint if you want. It doesn't make it any less fucking lame. Yeah. Like, Jesus Christ. So, but yeah, I digress. We did a bunch of shows with Rigorous, like, shows we really shouldn't have been doing. Like, we traveled up to Sudbury one time for $50. It was a good gig though. We played with Holocaust, and I think Wolf and Ancestry played that night. We played a lot of gigs with them, along with Chronosphere. Again, we were often playing like the same type of gigs, just different band depending on who got booked or not. But yeah, Chronosphere ended up ending around 2009 because Mick moved out west to Victoria, and he's actually in like a great band now called Altered Dead. Everyone should pick up their new album. It's awesome. Just came out. But after that, I had, you know, Gnarly Skull wasn't really active at that point, so I needed a band. So I started Bacon with this dude I knew called Haken. And initially it was my dad playing bass, and we had Punk Boy Justin, who's now passed away, playing drums. You know, not to speak ill of the dead, but having, you know, a homeless drunk dude is not the best method for having a good band, like especially when you use your drummer. So we were not really good for the first couple of years that we were around. We kind of ended for a while, but Bacon ended up getting back together with like a different rhythm section, and we did a lot of shows with Bacon, you know, with me on vocals, but like I would write a lot of the stuff. But with Bacon, I kind of realized it sucks writing stuff and then not actually having an instrument to play, because it's hard to show other people how to play something when you don't have anything to play. So like, you know, you feel like an asshole asking for their guitar or whatever to play it to them. So you end up like da 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 da, like trying to explain a song like that, which is not always easy to do if you're trying to explain like a tough song or something. So, but yeah, Bacon kind of dissolved like a year or so ago. But at the same time, luckily, Kenny, who had joined Bacon as our bass player in the last like couple of years of us being around, we decided we were going to continue working together, and we started jamming with Jeremy, who had recently joined Sick of Shit, and we were starting to play like a bunch of the old Bacon songs and stuff that I had written, and there was like a bunch of new stuff that Kenny and I were working on. And then we brought in Adam from Sick of Shit, and yeah, it's Life Imprisonment. That's what we're doing now. Like that's my main band that I play in all the time, and like write for and stuff like that. So beyond that, these days I also play in the Plain Steel. That's my buddy Ross's band. Ross was my, you know, guitar player in Gnarly Skull, Chronosphere. He played drums on half of the Bacon demo because Justin got too fucked up and didn't show up to the recording. You know, Like he's been in a lot. Yeah, actually he played with Rigorous even at one point. He just didn't do a show with us. Yeah, like he's played in a lot of different bands I've been in. But yeah, he has the band The Plain Steel, and it's like folk and roll, like psychedelic stuff. Yeah, they needed a bass player for live stuff, so I do that, and I record some of the stuff that's easier. They bring in a ringer for some of the stuff that's a little bit more intricate because, my bass playing is definitely focused on punk rock and stuff like that. I can learn more intricate stuff, but it's a son of a bitch, and fuck that. But yeah, those are the bands that I play in. Okay, so craziest thing I ever saw at a show. Like I was saying, I'm going to edit myself a little bit because my mom may watch this. So I'm going to try not to say too many things that I did at shows. Because a lot of the time, the crazy shit was us doing really, really stupid drunk stuff. There's a lot of ridiculous shit that we've seen, like especially at Gnarly Skull shows. Like anytime we played Brantford, it was just pandemonium. Like kind of to sum up the existence of like Gnarly Skull and like what our shows used to be like, it was like, you haven't lived until you've done lines of blow off of some seedy bar toilet. Like let me tell you. Like that's basically that's how it went. I remember the one time we were playing in Brantford, I think it was, and like the local band was like, they're all nervous about smoking a joint outside or something like that. And we walk around the corner and like they're like taking me to like go hide behind a dumpster or something like that to smoke a joint. And as we walk around the corner, my drummer is cutting up lines of Adderall on someone's hood, standing there in the side parking lot with openly drinking whiskey. So that was just as an example, like kind of the Gnarly Skull stuff. Lots of stupid shit. Ryland, my buddy from Gnarly Skull, I remember the one night we played at the Corktown, and this is years ago at the old Corktown, before like the old switcheroo with the owners and all whatever happened. Back when the men's washroom was filled with like Jurassic Park sized piles of shit in each toilet, and like vomit in every urinal, and like an inch of piss on the floor. But I remember walking into the bathroom the one night, and Ryland was braced on the stall, spraying shit at the toilet, like in the general direction of the toilet, because like all we had eaten for days was like chicken wings and booze and stuff. So he had horrible shits. So later that night, he actually took off his pants and walked around with his cock out until someone bought him a drink, and finally the bartender offered to buy him a drink because she didn't want to see it anymore. So later that night, his girlfriend put out a smoke on my sack, which was rough, but well deserved. I was doing the I sat and gum trick, which was a classic for us back then, and one of us would pull up the sack and tell someone, look, I sat in gum, and then everyone would stare at it, and then he'd say, oh, there's hair in it too, and then they'd realize it was your balls that they were looking at. But Lisa, having seen this trick done many, many times, realized what was going on and just immediately stubbed her smoke out on my balls. So that's why you don't do the ball trick to people who have seen it before. But yeah, lots and lots and lots of crazy shit at many shows. So the one night at Polo's, which was a great place to play in Hess, which was odd. Like it was us and like a bunch of fucking Hess Village club goers and shit. But they let us put on shows there for some reason, and I have no idea why. But we were playing there, and just ridiculous pandemonium every time. Like I remember the drummer for the Twat Rods at one point stripped naked and pissed off the balcony onto people standing on the patio below. And they didn't kick us out. They let us book gigs after that. I couldn't believe it. Like, they were the most forgiving bar staff ever. I forget their names now, but my apologies to them, because honestly, we were not nice to that bar. But yeah, we had a lot of great gigs there. Like, the floor almost buckling in. I remember a couple times because there's so many people crammed upstairs with like, all the sweat pooling in the middle. It was gross. Yeah, lots of like gross puke stories and stuff like that. Obviously, Rye has a habit of vomiting before every gig, so I have an amazing collection of pictures of him, like, projectile vomiting outside of bars and shit like that. So, a lot of the craziest stories are what happened after we got back to the house. We lived at the Skull House, or Fort Christmas as it was called, because every day was Christmas at Fort Christmas. But I forget what gig it was, even some fucking, maybe even the Casualties or some shit at the Underground. But we ended up back at our place, and I was hosting some sort of raging, ridiculous party. And our friend Mark, who is the singer of the Twat Rods, coincidentally, he and his cousin, whose name I forget now, ended up having a fist fight in the living room over my bottle of whiskey because they wanted to have more of it. So they fought each other over my goddamn bottle, which was awesome. But afterwards, to make up for it, they decided to have a blood pact. And so they took a safety razor and slashed the palms of their hands a whole bunch of times until they got enough blood flow going that they could get a proper, like, blood pact thing going on. But obviously, that left their hands horribly, disgustingly shredded, with, like, peels of skin hanging down. But I'll never forget, like, our friend Mark ended up bandaging his hand with a sock and duct tape. And the duct tape was completely soaked in blood, and it was just gross. But it ended up on the floor of the kitchen in Fort Christmas, because at that point I had abandoned the kitchen, because our friend Sallow had decided to do art, and there was paint everywhere, and it was fucked. It was a fucked up scene in general. But yeah, like, I'd taken down a wall in Ryland's room that night. He was upset. But Ryland came home finally on Sunday, was, witnessing the devastation of the house. Because, like I said, like, I had taken down a wall, like, with all of his posters on it and stuff. Like, I ripped through them. Like, I don't know what the fuck I was doing. But he was pissed. But then he went into the kitchen. And all of a sudden, I'll never forget it, in the midst of him shouting and, like, being angry, he stopped, shrieked, and then shook his leg as violently and as hard as he could, because that bloody sock had stuck to his bare foot with the duct tape. And he was horrified, and rightly so. That was disgusting. But yeah, there's lots of crazy shit. But that is a sampling, and that is like a kind of PG-13-ish version that I don't mind my mom seeing. So, what I like about being a musician, what I don't like about being a musician. What I like about it, it's what I do. I don't know. Like, it's what I've always done. So that's kind of how I view, like, periods of my life almost, like, as going by what band I was playing in full time at that point, because when I was doing them, especially like back when I was younger, like before I had my son, it was like very much full time, like I was working. But like with Chronosphere and Rigorous, we were practicing 5 nights a week, and then the occasional Gnarly Skull practice in there too. So that's what I do, like even these days I'm sometimes doing 2 practices a week and all that stuff. So with schedules the way they are, it can't be quite as often as I would like, but that's what I do. So that's what I like about doing music. I mean, I've had spurts of my life where, like when I first had my kid, it was hard to play all the time, and it sucked. Honestly, like it's hard for me to not play music. Like the last year and a bit of not playing gigs, I've been going crazy. At least now, the last few months, we've been able to practice. Before that, I was going a little stir crazy, I must admit, not being able to do anything, not being able to jam or anything like that. So that was brutal. But now that we're back at it, being able to play, it's just the best thing. Like sitting there with the other dudes in your band, like with your drummer, your guitar player, your singer, or whatever. For in my case, because I'm playing bass now, it's awesome. Being able just to jam out and learn new shit. That's what I love about playing. Playing shows is awesome as well. I don't mind recording, but playing gigs is where it's at for me, at least. So my dislikes about being a musician, like there's pitfalls. Like there's a lot of money spent. Like practicing is expensive. Like when we used to have a space above Leathers, it was like $400 a month for a place to jam. Back then it was awesome, having a place up there, because our drummer was living there, all that sort of stuff, but yeah, it was great. We were able to practice 5 days a week, and just it was $400, but these days, we've been practicing, renting rehearsal factory and that sort of thing. And that can get pricey. You're looking at like $40 every time you jam type thing. So if you're doing that a few times a week, that gets up there. Other things that I don't like. It's a pain in the ass sometimes to keep band members. I'm very thankful right now for the bands that I have. To paraphrase Matthew McConaughey, I get older, but my bandmates stay the same age. So, it's true to a certain extent. Like my drummer is like 15 years younger than me or something like that. No, 14 maybe. But it's good. It's just a pain in the ass. I guess not a lot of people want to be, in their late 30s and have nothing else going on for them besides playing in a few punk rock bands. But, that's kind of what comes with it. That's what I like to do. I figure in for a penny, in for a pound at this point. So, there's no turning back, But, there's some drawbacks to being in bands and stuff, like it's a pain in the ass logistically. For myself, I guess my nature has always been kind of organizing shit. Like even when I was a teenager, I was always the one saying like, all right, we're going to meet here. You're going to grab the weed. You're going to grab the booze, and I'd figure out what we were doing. And that's kind of translated into the band where it's like, okay, all right, we're jamming. Or when are we practicing? We're practicing this time. What time? Okay. Are you good? Because like they said in the Ramones, like to quote Johnny Ramone or paraphrase him, someone's got to do it. If someone doesn't do it, nothing will ever get done. I'm like, my most useless talent, besides being able to play bass, I guess my World War II trivia. I'm like a big World War II buff. I could go on and on and on about all that sort of stuff. Kind of like we were saying before, it's like if you're going to be against something, you got to understand it fully. So I am very much a history buff when it comes to like, Nazi Germany and stuff like that because of how abhorrent it was. Like I was saying, if it had never happened and they wrote a comic book about it, you wouldn't believe it because it just seems so over the top evil, like just on the nose evil. And, anyone who has any sort of affiliation with that, if they're either ignorant of history or they don't care, both of those aren't cool at all. So, yeah, I'm a big World War II buff. I guess it's not necessarily useless, but, the amount of knowledge that I have definitely is. I mean, I guess no one needs to know details about troop movements on the Eastern Front in the winter of 1943 and stuff like that. But there we go. Besides that, more fun, useless talent is I can sing the Japanese national anthem in Japanese as well as English. I learned it in grade 2. Yeah, It's pretty good. If you get me drunk enough, I will probably do it at a gig at some point. So yeah, buy me drinks at shows, and I will do that. But yeah, I'm good. That's my useless talent. Steve asked me nicely to do it, so I'm doing it. So, in Japanese, Kimi ga yo wa shio ni yoshio ni zazare ishi no awo oto narate koke no musumade. And in English, that is, may thy peaceful reign last long, may it last for thousands of years until this tiny stone will grow into a mass of rock and the moss will cover it all deep and thick. So, my favorite food. There's a couple that I'll talk about. There used to be a place downtown called Chinese Dumpling, which had shredded potato and pork, which looked disgusting as hell, but was amazing. And if you were in there, they had like $3 drinks, so we would often drink a Chinese dumpling, which they weren't impressed with, but they had amazing shredded pork and potato. Um, I'm German, or half German, so I really like schnitzel and like spätzle and stuff like that. I could eat schnitzel every day, or goulash and stuff like that. But probably my favorite food is my buddy Ross. Whenever you record at his place as like a reward for being able to record the song properly, he will like make a homemade pizza, and it is like the best goddamn pizza you will ever have. With like, he makes his own goddamn stuffed crust. It's insane. Yeah, like, just ridiculous. Like, he should make a restaurant. Ross, I'm sure you're going to eventually watch this, open a goddamn restaurant. You have missed your calling in life, my friend. You should be making pizza for people. But yeah, those are my favorite foods.